Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sun Devil Learning Lab. Today we are going to be talking about comparing and contrasting two different articles or short essays, which are going to be talking about the same topic. Are going to have different views. And again, I'm Miss Alford.
I'm Mr. Miranda. And just remember to take out your writer's notebook and pencil so you can take notes. But yeah, continue the video when you're ready. All right, so by the end of this video, hopefully you guys will be able to say to yourselves, I can compare and contrast how two authors present different opinions on the same topic.
So first off, we're going to start with the question, why do you believe what you believe? This is a really big question, and this is going to be a lot that has to do with the lesson we're going to talk about today. You ask yourself questions like, what do you believe, what you believe, when you think about what you already know about certain facts and information. So maybe that's prior knowledge you have about different things. The experiences that you go through throughout your life, those experiences shape you to be who you are, and they affect your view and perspective on different things. And then the people you surround yourself with, or the people you listen to and you trust, those are going to be a lot of factors in believing what you believe. All of these come down to your worldview. So your perspective on different things, your different perspective on ideas or topics, and kind of the lens you look through life with. So these are different things to really consider, and these are certain things that authors consider as they write their arguments, as they discuss their opinions and back it up with evidence that they think is true to help an audience understand where that author is coming from.
And just like Miss Alford said, all of these factors play into what you believe on any topic. You can have like your worldview or your perspective on what things are can be on topics about like sports or even political issues. But for example, let's take a look at sports. So let's say you grew up in a family that loves a certain baseball team. They're the best baseball team in your opinion, in your family's opinion, and because you are surrounded by people all your life, like your family, that are hardcore fans of that one team, that might shape the way you see that team. That you might also start to believe that they're the best. Also, the experiences could affect your opinion on that same topic. So maybe your family always goes to games to see that particular baseball team. And also the facts that you get from certain news sources. So some sports news or movies, articles that you read yourself, and that might also shape and verify your opinion or your worldview or your perspective on that team. And again, it's not just this can affect any opinion about any topic. So just to refresh, point of view, you guys should already know. We're going to talk more about character point of view in relation to the author of an essay or an article in an argumentative text. And character point of view is the position or perspective or opinion a narrator has when observing others or other things. And in this case, we're going to be talking about the narrator, who is the author of the article or essay. And we're going to talk about their perspective or opinion on a certain topic or other things. The other type of point of view that you guys should recall is literary narrative point of view, which is just your basic first person, second person, and third person. And again, when we're looking at argumentative texts or informative texts, or even opinion essays, some of those texts are going to be part of them are going to be written in first person limited sometimes, based on like the author's point of view, or if they're trying to be as unbiased as they can, some of it might be in third person objective. But for the most part, just keep in mind we're going to talk about perspective more than we are about the second type of point of view.
So another important thing to understand is bias. Bias is so important in understanding where authors are coming from and whether or not there is a bias there in general. So, bias is leaning toward or away from any idea based on your own opinions and outlook on life. So, we talked about perspective and how experiences, how the people you surround yourself with, how your prior knowledge all affects your opinions and your outlook on life. But these are especially important because authors can show bias in their writing through their choice of words, selection of facts or examples they use to back up their reasoning, and then their tone of voice. How are they coming off? Are they very excited about what they're talking about? Do they seem to completely dislike whatever the topic is or idea? So, this is what we're going to be paying close attention to in the next couple of slides and short essays that we read.
Okay, so again, just to further emphasize the importance of your own perspective when you're interpreting facts. Um, so you can have different people looking at the same facts, but because they have a certain outlook on life or a certain perspective or point of view, that might affect the way that they interpret something. So again, if you look at facts or information from any form of media, whether it be an essay, article, movie, news, um, your experiences, your worldview, the people around you, and your own prior knowledge, the knowledge that you know before you even looked at that piece of text or media, can affect the way you take in that new information. And again, just as a refresher, a good argument, because we're going to be looking at arguments, a good argument will always state their claim because the author wants to make it clear what their stance is. Um, they're going to have evidence that supports their claim or the reasons to their claim, and to just to keep things fair and as unbiased as they can, even though it's going to still be biased. Um, just to be less biased, they're always, or they should, mention the other opposite point of view that their claim is doesn't really support. So it's a counter argument. Counter means opposite. So you authors talking about their argument, counter argument is the opposite argument.
So, some gray areas of arguments. An author's claim in an essay or an article or anything doesn't mean that their stance is always correct. So, that's an important thing to understand because although an author might back it up with some evidence, they still have bias and they still have an opinion. It's not just facts. So, sometimes this can vary and depending on the topic, but it's important to understand that an author's claim does not always mean that they're correct. And also the counter argument isn't necessarily wrong either. So they both might not be correct or incorrect, but the author just doesn't agree with that perspective or that point of view or their counter argument. They just don't agree with the opposite argument that's being made against them or that they're disagreeing with. So that's important to understand as you read different articles or essays and find bias, but being able to understand that authors are making a claim, they're having reasoning behind what they are talking about and their claim, and then use evidence to back it up. Also, like Mr. Miranda just said, acknowledging the counter argument.
So we already mentioned we're going to look at two different essays. We made these essays, but just for the sake of argument, Miss Alford chose to side um, with school uniforms being a good thing. So schools should have school uniforms, and then I sided on the opposite side. Schools shouldn't have school uniforms. So that's just what we're going to talk about. But we're going to dissect our essays just right now.
Okay, so pros of school uniforms. The clothes you wear play a big role in your everyday life. Sometimes you have to dress to impress, or you are just hanging out at home in your loungewear, and other times you are wearing clothes to school. Everybody has different taste in clothes, what they like, what they don't like, but a big topic of conversation in clothing in schools is school uniforms. Regardless of grade, uniforms can be so helpful and produce such positive outcomes for schools. Schools should require students to wear uniforms. So I just want to pause right there and make it clear that the claim that is made in this first paragraph is that schools should require students to wear a uniform. So obviously, I took the stand that this is a good thing, and I'm going to be arguing or saying and giving my opinions and trying to back it up with evidence as to why schools should require students to wear uniforms. I grew up going to schools that required students to wear uniforms. And at first, it was something that I hated. But as time went on and I realized all the benefits of uniforms, my mind started to change. So, this is going to be a bias. This is going to be, I agree with school uniforms, and that's a good thing for schools because of my experiences, what I went through personally, and the benefits it had for me. Therefore, in my mind, I think that this is a good thing, and I think that there's a lot of benefits to it. Whereas maybe Mr. Miranda is going to take a different side where he wasn't, if you didn't grow up going, wearing uniforms, maybe you have a different take on all of this. So it's important to understand that this is the bias, and it explicitly says it, that I did go to a school where I had to wear uniforms. So that also helps to make this more of a biased short essay. First off, school uniforms allow students to be focused on learning and work rather than focused on outfits, whether that's their own or others. When you have to plan out what you're going to wear every single day and you're constantly considering what your peers might think of it, it can cause you to take your focus away from education and more on what it is you are wearing or what others might be wearing. I think it's important to understand that uniforms can create an environment that is equal for everyone, where students are all wearing the same thing. So for students who come from a lower income family who cannot afford the nicest clothes or newest clothes often, don't feel poorly about themselves because of something they have no control over. School uniforms, in that sense, make it easier too for families because they do not have to go buy more and different clothes often. Some might say that school uniforms emphasize lower income divisions and they are supposed to eliminate this, but this is not true because uniforms make shopping for clothes easier. And many schools have uniform donations, making it easy for students to get access to clothes they need. So and that above right there, some might say that school uniforms emphasize lower income divisions they're supposed to eliminate. I took it up. I decided to, I gave the counter argument. I acknowledged the counter argument there, but then I continue to say why that's not true. So like Mr. Miranda was talking about, how it's important that when you are making an argument to acknowledge the counter argument, that's exactly what I did. Whereas some people say that school uniforms emphasize lower divisions they are supposed to eliminate. Well, this is not true because uniforms make shopping for clothes easier, and many schools have uniform donations that make it easy for students to get access to the clothes that they need to be wearing on a day-to-day basis. Lastly, school uniforms create a sense of unity among the school, where students are one. Wearing uniforms also enhances school pride and community spirit. So that is another reasoning I give as to why school uniforms are a good thing. Studies show that students who wear school uniforms feel a stronger sense of belonging in their school because uniforms promote unity. And that is my evidence to support my reasoning. The studies show that students who wear school uniforms feel a stronger sense of belonging in their school. Although individuality is important, students have so much time outside of school to wear whatever clothing they'd like. I think it's important for the school as a whole, teachers and students, to have a sense of unity.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay, so now I'm going to read my why we shouldn't have school uniforms, or why schools shouldn't allow. So it starts off like this. Why should we bother with school uniforms? They do nothing but suppress our individuality, force us to conform to outdated societal norms, and don't help with getting rid of socioeconomic divide. Some might say that having uniforms in schools can help students reduce bullying and enhances school pride and community, which isn't necessarily true. Students should be able to wear whatever they want at school so they are the most comfortable. Schools shouldn't have school uniforms. So right here at the very ending, um, at the very end of the introductory paragraph, I chose to put my claim, and that we usually find the claim within the first few sentences of the introductory paragraph or the very last sentence of the introductory paragraph. So I just chose to put at the end. Miss Alford chose to put it like in the first few sentences, which is totally fine. That's just both of those places are where you normally find it. Um, Also, this this paragraph starts off with an obvious bias. It starts off with a question, and then the sentence right after it attacks the view of why we shouldn't, or no, attacks the view of why we should have school uniforms. So it just gives a few reasons why we shouldn't allow school uniforms, and then right here, the counter argument is mentioned already within the first paragraph. Some might say that having school uniforms in schools can help students reduce bullying and enhance the school pride and community. So that's the argument, or that's some of the reasons that Miss Alford gave. But I just chose to acknowledge her counter argument and some of her reasons here, um, coincidentally. Oops. So I'm going to continue reading my essay. Many people believe that uniforms can increase school pride, which brings the student body closer. So again, I restate one of the reasons to the counter. So the next paragraph says, some schools require boys to wear pants or shorts, and girls are required to wear skirts much of the time. In a world where people are becoming more in touch with themselves and what it means to belong to a certain gender, many believe that conforming people to binary gender norms is oppressive. Peter McGuire tells us in his article, No Skirting the School Uniform Debate, shares with us a story of a transgendered 16-year-old boy, Seamus. Seamus shares that sitting in a blouse and skirt all day made me feel insanely anxious. I wasn't taken seriously. When people feel they aren't taken seriously, this can hurt one's self image. Uniforms can force those like Seamus to play a role they don't wish to play and limits their freedom of expression of their feelings and ideas. The U.S. Supreme Court case Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District verified that it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the school gates at the school gate. In other words, it violates our First Amendment rights as U.S. citizens. So here in this paragraph, we have the reason, one reason why school uniforms shouldn't be allowed in schools. Um, it starts off like pointing out that some schools require you to wear clothes according to your gender, boy or girl. Um, but some people don't necessarily identify with their given birth gender. So like some people are born boys or girls, um, but they don't identify as that. They don't feel that way, and they feel very uncomfortable. Um, just like the piece of evidence for that reason was the anecdote of um, the 16-year-old boy or transgender boy, Seamus, who didn't feel comfortable wearing a skirt all day because school was telling him he was a girl. Um, and then another reason uh, is that was presented in this paragraph was it violates your freedom of expression and makes you feel almost invisible when you can't express your feelings and ideas. And then the piece of evidence says that the U.S. Supreme Court even said that it like violates your constitutional rights as a U.S. citizen. All right, so the next paragraph, many people believe that uniforms can increase school pride, which brings the student body closer. David L. Brunsma, PhD, says that more affluent families buy more uniforms per child. The less affluent, they have one. It's more likely to be tattered, torn, and faded. It only takes 2 months for socioeconomic differences to show up again. Students care about what they wear, and they might feel separated from their peers whose clothes always look new. So here's here I chose to give the reason of the counter argument, where where some people say that uniforms unify the student body, but I gave a piece of evidence that goes against that claim or reason, and it's the one where even though you have uniforms that make you look all the same, eventually the differences between you and someone else. So like maybe like with someone grew up in a poorer family, a less affluent family, and their family can't afford to buy them more than one uniform, but other families can. So their other classmates, they have more than one uniform because their families can afford it. Eventually, within 2 months, the kid that only has one uniform, their uniform starts to fade, and the differences start to become more apparent. So Brunsma is arguing that it doesn't unify the student body in that sense. A great number of students and experts agree that uniforms in schools are just a bad idea and can even divide people because of socioeconomic reasons. Even the U.S. Supreme Court stated that uniforms violate our constitutional rights. The well-being of the student mind, their emotions, and their rights as citizens should be reason enough for schools to not have school uniforms. So here, this is just the concluding paragraph. It's just summarizing all of the evidence together, and then it states the claim at the end. So in a good argument, they summarize their evidence, maybe even summarize the counter argument sometimes. I don't think I did it here, but they also restate their claim in different words.
Okay, so the claim that I made, it says for school uniforms, the schools should require students to wear uniforms. And I said that in the first paragraph.
And for me, I did the same thing. I stated my claim in the first paragraph at the end of the first paragraph, and schools shouldn't have school uniforms. That was my claim. Yeah.
So reasoning that I gave was that school uniforms create a sense of unity among the school where students are one. Wearing uniforms also enhances school pride and community spirits. And the evidence that I give was that studies show that students who wear school uniforms feel a stronger sense of belonging in their school because uniforms promote unity. And that's important to give your reasoning and then back it up with some evidence to make an audience understand more where you're coming from and make it look a little less biased.
Yeah. And that was just one reason and one piece of evidence that she shared. She had others, but I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to show you one piece of evidence and reason that it supports. So I already went into depth about Brunsma, the doctor or PhD, who talked about how more affluent families can buy more uniforms and the less affluent families might only be able to buy one, and that differences might come out within the first 2 months because some clothes might look more tattered than others. Students care about what they wear, and they might feel separated from their peers whose clothes always look new. So in this case, this piece of evidence came after a reason for the counter argument. That's why this piece of evidence came before the reason that I was arguing. So my reason in this case came after. Um, Still the same effect.
And then how you knew there was bias here. Well, obviously I was giving my opinions, but also was the fact that I stated I grew up going to schools that required students to wear uniforms. And at first it was something that I hated, but as time went on, I realized the benefits of uniforms and my mind started to change. So having this bias, having these prior experiences, and basically explaining that also in the essay allows somebody to understand that, okay, she's going to promote them and want them also, and have that perspective because of her experiences that she went through when she was younger and what she went through with school uniforms.
Yep. And just like hers, my bias came like right off the bat in the beginning paragraph. I already discussed when as I was reading. Um, but yeah, just to like go over it just very quickly, why it I stated that why would she wish why should we bother with school uniforms? Sorry, they do nothing but suppress our individuality, force us to conform to outdated societal norms, yada yada. So here I came off right off the bat like obviously opposing the other side of school uniforms or having school uniforms. But yeah.
There was also, like Mr. Miranda said, that we both gave other reasonings and supported evidence. I brought up things maybe that he did not touch on, so things like um, school uniforms promote the idea that students are more focused on schoolwork and focused more on their education than what they're wearing on a day-to-day basis. Whereas Mr. Miranda brought up things like how different genders and how wearing a school uniform affects them and how they feel and their self-image. So although we didn't always acknowledge all of the counter arguments, we were good about acknowledging some of them when it was important and ones that each other were going to be pretty much talking about.
Yeah. And also like Miss Alford said, our own experiences affected the way we wrote these essays. Again, she grew up in schools that, like in her statement here, she grew up in schools that required uniforms. But for me, I didn't really give much about my background, but the author sometimes doesn't even give you a lot about how they grew up. But how they grew up or their own environment still affects why they write the way they write. And the reason why I chose to talk about or touch on gender was because in my schools, in the public school system, the school I went to, um, there were many that didn't identify as their the gender that they were born with, and they identify like the some other gender, like they were either transgender or even other genders that weren't mentioned in the essay here. Um, so I so I just want I was just aware about growing up. I was aware about how some people might not be comfortable with the norms that our own society accepts, like girls wear skirts, boys wear shorts, and even like our bathrooms are separated by gender, by only two genders. But yeah, that's how I grew up. People pointed stuff out to me because those are the people I was around with growing up in school.
Okay. So um, before, as we go over these and discuss these questions and answers, take a second to write the maybe questions down in your notebook and write out some answers. And whenever you feel ready, unpause the video and listen to the answers that Mr. Miranda and I provide. So what affects an author's argument or personal view or perspective about something, Mr. Miranda?
So as we stated it like multiple times throughout this lesson, is that an author's experiences, their own experiences that may or may not be covered in their text, will affect the way that they present um, their views or perspectives on a topic. The people they're around with, um, in data like everyday life or growing up, um, and the information that they already knew before researching any further on the topic they're discussing in their text. Okay, so I'm going to read this next question to you out loud. What can you do to be less biased in an argumentative essay? So just take a moment to think about it, discuss if you have anyone to discuss to about this question, and maybe even write it down in your writer's notebook. Okay, so now that you've taken the time to do that, Miss Alford, what can you do to be less biased in an argumentative essay?
Well, to be less biased in an argumentative essay, you definitely want to, of course, you have your opinions and you have your experiences that you can talk about, but to be less biased, you can back up your reasoning with evidence. And with evidence, it's a lot more, I wouldn't say believable, but it's easier to get the audience to understand where you're coming from and understand your reasons with evidence that you choose to support what you are saying. And then the last question is it okay to be biased sometimes? So like we've done with the last two questions, take a second to write this down, maybe ask somebody else, ask yourself, and write down a little note about it. But Mr. Miranda, is it okay to be biased sometimes?
It's kind of hard not to be biased. When you're speaking or writing something down as an author, um, it's it is okay to be biased. It is okay to express your views, but you should also try not to discount the other side because they might have points that you should be aware of as to why they might believe the way they believe. Not everyone's going to agree on everything, and everyone's going to have their own biases um, about any topic, but just as long as you give the other side a fair chance at an argument in your writing, or when you're reading, as long as the author gives a fair chance of the opposite perspective, then it's okay to show some bias. But there are some instances where you shouldn't be showing bias. So like ideally, news reports and news articles should be the least biased possible, so the public can know um, the best information. Also, certain jobs require you to not show too much bias. Like judges, hopefully they're not biased to certain things and people. But generally, it's okay to show some bias. But some instances, there's a lot of gray area. So there's some instances where you have to be the least biased as you can.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope you guys were able to take a lot away from it. And we do have there we go. We have the learning guide that you guys can go and click on and get some more resources and extra practice with looking at different arguments, different opinions, finding the biases, and really understanding where an author is coming from and their perspective. So I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon.
Yep. Have a good one.